Stifles. This is the only Delver variant that is still playing Stifle.
Right.
Which can be good in a lot of matchups. I'm not sure that Miracles is one of them.
No, see, a lot of the mana denial just doesn't really play that well against Miracles, as this deck does have a fairly high land count, a bunch of cantrips to smooth its draws, a bunch of basic lands, and, you know, Aiden can just function off of, say, 2-3 mana for a long time.
Well, here we go for the first game. Colin's going to be on the play. Certainly will help him out. His deck only has the 4/1 drops now. Just the 4 copies of Delver Secrets. We're not looking at any sort of Nimble Mongoose that we mentioned.
No, and this is Mullen. The Tarmogoyfs specifically are so good because they're able to outgrow Chain Lightning and Lightning Bolt and just go over the top of what the other fair decks are trying to play with right now.
Yeah, against Miracles, it's going to die to the same removal that all the other threats do.
What a shame. What a shame.
Would you see turn 1 Delver is the play from Collins. Aiden going to go for a Ponder. And this is kind of the thing where you're starting to get out from under the mana denial. You know, we got to crack a fetch land against a Stifle deck. His Ponder wasn't dazed. He's fetching a basic island. This is all setting things up for some good turns down the road.
Right. This is a spot where, even if Collins did have the daze, it's hard to say that if he can really afford to be dazing Ponder when you know there are so many powerful cards in Brier's deck between Terminus, Counterbalance, Jace the Mind Sculptor, and 2 copies of Back to Basics.
Yeah, 2 more basic islands and a Ponder on top for Aiden. Basics are pretty welcome in this deck, and he'll go ahead and keep them on top. Draws 1 of them.
And one of the issues that the Timur Delver deck does have is if the opponent just hits land drops, cards like Daze, Spell Pierce, and so forth, just lose a ton of their value. They just don't do anything.
What it does have going for it, though, is a 3/2 flyer for 1. Collins swings in here. That transformed off of a Brainstorm.
And this is the recipe for these tempo decks to end up winning, as it doesn't matter if your cards don't work on turn 8 if the opponent dies on turn 7.
That much makes sense. Another Delver and a fetch land for Collins. Back to Aiden. Does have, it looks like, a copy of Counterbalance in hand. Still has probably 2 copies still in the deck.
Double check 2 Counterbalance, yes.
Okay. Going to set up with Ponder. With 2 threats, he may want to try to find a white source or a Terminus.
Yeah,
so
Brier not having a white source is a pretty big problem here. When it was just a 1 insect elaboration, he could theoretically spend a little bit of time on development and get away with that. But taking 4 or worse, 6 a turn, that's only going to give him 3-4 turns before he's straight up dead. Yeah,
and this is the first show of weakness we've seen on Brier's side, having to shuffle off the Ponder.
That's something where if you are on the other side of the table, you feel relieved. You go, oh, yeah, get a random one when 3 cards weren't good enough.
And trying to find the white mana. He did draw into Tundra off the Ponder, so white mana's available. But it's non-basic, and right now it's playing into Daze. There's a lot to be concerned about on Aiden's side.
Right, you don't really want to play into the Daze. And then on top of that, you mentioned it being a non-basic. If you expose it, then don't play into the Daze. It could get wastelanded.
Aiden's going to play around neither. It looks like, at this point, he's feeling a bit too much pressure. So here's the swords. This is the Daze check. And then on Collins' turn, we're going to see the wasteland check.
Right, and this is a spot where if you can't beat it, make him have it.
Looking over Collins' hand. Looks like he does have the wasteland, does not have the Daze. Had to stifle that he's waiting to try to convert here. And it's going to be a win there for Brier. The Insectile Aberration exiled away. Risk taken, but a good risk, paying off. Will Collins get another insect? Likely not. He's not showing it. Now he has to decide if he wants to draw it.
Right, with this fetch land synergy is so good in these Delver decks.
There's a lot in his hand that's not playing right now. He has his 1 copy of Dead Gone in hand. He has 1 Stifle in his hand. You'd really like to find a Brainstorm to get rid of those.
Right, and you know, the one nice thing about this Stifle is if he's able to wasteland this Tundra away, he could keep Brier off of white for a while, and there isn't a mono-blue way to deal with Delver of Secrets once it is transformed.
Okay. Don't mind it. And that might be the game plan. See Collins right now showing he's not an Is It deck. Fetches up a Tropical Island and then draws Lightning Bolt. So the swing is just for 1. Aiden goes to a 15, but does lose the dual land to Wasteland.
It's a nice wasteland. Extended border from the looks of things.
Can Aiden find more mana? He has a basic island, and that looks to be it right now.
Yeah, this may be the spot where he just has to jam this counterbalance and hope that it does anything.
That's going to be the play. And on Collins' side, that might just work.
There are two options. It's good enough or it's not.
It's going to brainstorm in response. And I'd be interested to see if he lightning bolts in response as well. Counterbalance is not the hard lock it used to be out of the deck, but 1 mana cards can still be tricky to resolve.
It does look like Collins actually picks up a daze off of this brainstorm here, so it's unlikely this counterbalance is going to do very much. There was the original, well, this brainstorm might not resolve, I might as well fire it off, and now, oh, a piece of candy.
Yeah, now he's deciding which card to reveal to transform the Delver. Yeah, it's a bit nicer of a place to be. First update, Collins' teammate Will Pulliam takes game 1 over on the modern table.
Pretty unsurprising, the Blink My Bujoka Bog deck over and over and over.
Dredge can take games, but it can be pretty rough.
Taking 2 of them in 3 shots is hard.
Yeah. And Daze from Collins. We mentioned he found it off the brainstorm. So far, so good. Aiden has to pass back. And Collins cranking up the aggro here. End step lightning bolt sends Aiden down to 12. Upkeep transforms off a brainstorm, gets a 3-2. That's going to be doing more work, putting Aiden down to 9 this turn.
Things are looking pretty good for Mullen at this point. You know, Brier can't even just rip Terminus off the top. He doesn't have the mana for it.
Yeah. Tarmogoyf for the follow-up here from Collins. And I think sensing that, because he can't draw Terminus, that makes it safe to just put a second creature onto the board.
Exactly. Just put it on the battlefield, get your creatures out, slip them through counter magic.
Right now, 4/5, they're missing creature, but they have enchantment in the graveyard. So we're looking at 7 damage. Yeah.
And we saw Brier pick up a Plains. Now
that's a big draw.
Yeah, it is a huge draw. He just needs to figure out what he's doing with it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, right, he could Miracle the Terminus if he had an instant speed card draw here, right?
Right.
Something like if he can get a Terminus on top of his deck and a Brainstorm in his hand, that Plains might be good enough to try for Terminus. A lot of things have to go right, and then, of course, he has to not get dazed. And that's not going to help. Can't set something up. Top-bottom draws off the Preordain. And, yeah, it looks like they're counting size on Tarmogoyf. We have it at 4/5.
Is there enchantment in graveyard?
There is. There's not a creature, though.
Oh.
So it is 4/5, though, not the way you'd normally expect. So Swords to Plowshares on the Tarmogoyf is how Aiden will spend the white mana for this turn. More game 1's coming in on the standard table. It's Aiden's teammate Matt Tumavitch picking up the win. So a split on the other tables. This one's still in game 1. And on Aiden's side, he does, if he can survive long enough to cast his cards, he has the right cards here. You see Monastery Mentor, Council's Judgment, another Counterbalance.
It always seems to feel that way. It's similar to the Sultai midrange deck we were covering earlier, where the issue is not the power level of the Miracles cards, it's the fact that they cost a bunch of mana and take a long time to get online.
So back over to Collins. He has Aiden down to 9. Starts on a Brainstorm. Force of Will, Daze, both picked up.
Not having ways to shuffle cards away is so huge here.
Yeah, so instead of us being shuffling cards away, he's just picking which of the ones he needs to have now and which ones he can wait on.
Exactly. He's hiding this Dead Gone as long as he can. Just, it doesn't do anything.
Swing, Aiden down to 6. Well, there might be an opportunity, right? There's a Monastery
Mentor. You're right.
Yeah. down to 6 for Aiden.
Mullen may get an opportunity to use this Stifle. It looked like Brier picked up a Windswept Teeth.
Yeah, he actually still has the Stifle from the beginning here. Yeah, it's Stifle Days Force of Will
Yes.
in his hand.
Yeah, and this is one of the matchups where normally you're trying to stifle one of the first couple of land drops, but the fourth land is almost as good as the first one.
A fetch from Aiden down to 5, and this will get the Stifle from Collins. A big turn there. Takes away the second white mana source. I think Aiden was hoping to go for a basic Plains and Council's Judgment away the attacker.
Either that or resolve this Chase the Mind Sculptor. There were so many things that he could have gone for now, and now he's just kind of stuck playing a counterbalance.
So there's a counterbalance. Collins does have a Force of Will, but that's not going to earn it.
It just doesn't matter.
Yeah, the card on the board is the one that matters. Swings in. Aiden down to 2. Collins' pickup was the Tarmogoyf. Does he want to extend it into the Terminus, or possible Terminus? That's what he's going to decide here, and he says sure.
All right, let's see if the top cards...
No, it is not a 2, and it's a Spell Pierce. That's not going to play here. And Aiden, seeing the Spell Pierce coming, picks up the card, so it is Collins. Mullen on Temur Delver taking the first game. That mana denial coming in big at the end there.
Yeah, it ended up paying off for Mullen, just having exactly enough cards to kind of limp across the finish line there.
Yeah, that first part where he wastelanded away the Tundra, and then that Stifle at the end there. The -2 on the lands really cramping on Aiden's game.
Right, there's a spot where Aiden just kind of needed a little bit more time. He only really needed 1-2 more turns to kind of take over, but that's how it always feels with these Temur Delver decks.
Yeah. Looking at Aiden's sideboard, he has a Path to Exile, a third copy of Counterbalance, a Back to Basics, that's his third copy of that as well, 2 Surgical Extraction, 2 Fluster Storm. He has then we go over to some of the white cards here. We have Containment Priest, we have Celestial Purge, we have a Supreme Verdict.
Disenchant.
We have just straight up Disenchant, then 1 copy of Spell Snare.
So
a lot that plays here.
A lot of what Brier's likely looking at is the Spell Snare, just very good against Tarmogoyf, which is one of the big things in the matchup. The card Back to Basics is something that could end up knocking Mullen off of the ability to play if he's wanting to lean into that and board out some of his clunkier, more fragile spells.
Yeah.
Path to Exile is very good removal. The Delver deck does not play any basic lands, so that card is actually just a better Swords to Plowshares here. And there's even a case to be made for the card Supreme Verdict because it cannot be Dazed, Spell Pierced, Forced, etc.
Right.
And if your plan is to just be on a bunch of basics anyway, the games that you win are going to be games where you are able to cast Supreme Verdict.
Do you want the third copy of Back to Basics? I like it a lot if it can resolve, but 3 mana cards can be tough here.
Right, and that's kind of the big issue here. It depends how hard Brier's trying to lean into counter magic, where things like the card Counterspell, Counterbalance, Spell Pierce, Force of Will can be a little bit weaker since you're frequently behind on the battlefield. And Back to Basics is just something that lets you lock the Temur Delver deck completely out of the game, even though it also isn't as good when you're behind on the battlefield.
So not just regular versus, we also have Commander versus live here on this channel on the SCG Tour. Regular versus is Tuesday and Thursday, and on Wednesday we have live Commander versus. That is 5 p.m. Eastern Time. You can see some of your favorite players over here at Star City Games battling it out at the Commander table in 4-player games. Twitch.tv/SCG Tour.
Our Commander versus stars, our current tokens here on the SCG Tour.
Have a match result. Collins' teammate Will Pulliam taking the win 2-0 over Oliver Tamaiko, which means they're in the driver's seat. One more win from Collins, and they've punched their ticket to day 2.
Backs against the wall here. Brier cannot drop another game.
So looking at Collins' sideboard, the card I'm going straight to here is the 2 copies of Winter Orb he's decided to register today.
Winter Orb is incredible. This Miracles deck is very mana hungry, and Winter Orb preys on the strategies that tend to lean on cantrips a lot, and also big mana spells.
Right.
Your ancestral knowledges, your preordains, your ponders, your brainstorms, these all get so much worse when you start not getting to untap the land the following turn.
Yeah, and Brier is on the 4 accumulated knowledge build. There's just so much he spends his mana on. Is this standard enough that Brier knows it's coming and will have disenchants, or do you think this is just going to catch him?
It's something that's been in the Temur sideboard since, honestly, even the Grixis Delver decks during Deathrite era were sideboarding it, so it's something that's very likely to be on his radar. Most of how you're trying to beat it are going to be the spell snare out of a sideboard, or maybe trying to tag it with something like a counterbalance, revealing a Snapcaster Mage.
Yeah, it's hard to board in Disenchanting a deck where that would be the only target.
Exactly. You can't just end up in a spot where you're dying to a Tarmogoyf staring at a Disenchant in your hand, wondering why bad things happen to good people.
Other options, Colin's for sure going to go toward that Red Elemental Blast and Pyroblast, and maybe even the Vendilion Click.
Right, and Vendilion Click is great just because it's a flash threat, which lets you get through some of the Terminuses. It even lets you tuck Terminus with the Miracle trigger on the stack, so it can have a sort of stifle effect on its own triggered ability. And then you can just use it to kill a Jace out of nowhere. Vendilion Click is incredible in this matchup.
So Aiden will be on the play. Gonna be able to get on the board perhaps before that turn 1 Delver. Specifically, cards like Stifle can become a lot worse when Collins is on the draw.
Exactly, and there are some other cards that Mullen is just going to be so happy to get out of sideboard. We saw that Dead Gone kind of just taking up space most of the first game. Yeah. Dismember is something that you really don't want to have very many copies of in your deck.
And a quick mulligan for Aiden and for Collins as well.
So for Collins, is it a Mulligan?
Collins mulligan. Perhaps.
Perhaps.
And you see all players here going over toward the standard match. Tumavitch is up a game. Celestia tokens. A bit of a resurgence here. We see Brad Carpenter as well on it. That team, 7-1, already into day 2. Tumavitch selecting it as well.
It's one of the secret players of the format where it wants to avoid the Sultai mid-range deck when possible because some of the cards can just be nightmares. Like Finality is a very, very rough card. But, you know, if you're not prepared for the tokens deck, you'll just die. Right. It is very good at applying pressure that also just builds up a ton of resources. You know, Sapling Migration, for example, is a card that looks kind of mopey on its face at making 1/1s, but when you add a couple Lords in the mix, that builds up very quick, and you can't just cast down the creatures one at a time.
Both players keeping on 6. It's going to be a scry to the bottom for Brier. And Colin's going to think about it. A couple of basic lands in the hand for Aiden, 2 islands. And it looks like he has a fetch land here. I was going to say he could immediately set up that white mana source, but he is going to slow down on it.
It's possible he just has some way to fight over the card Stifle, or he's expecting Mullen to take them out.
And actually pretty heavy on lands here. Might have been a 4-land hand.
And that's a spot where you hope he leaves up mana for Stifle instead of deploying a creature.
Looks like Force of Wills still in the deck for Collins as well.
Yeah, and that's something that's going to be much more attractive for Mullen than it is for Brier, with the big reason being that Brier just has some cards that are worth way more than 2 cards on their face. So, say, pitching up Cantrip and Forcing is very worth answering a Jace or a Back to Basics or a Terminus.
So just fetch lands. It's the kind of game that you typically see the Miracles player just continue to make land drops.
And stare.
And do not, yeah. Everything's going according to plan. Maybe cast a cantrip at some point. That's exactly what he's going to do.
Speak of the devil. And we see an accumulated knowledge hanging out in Brier's hand. This is him just paying respect to cards like Daze, to cards like Stifle, and wanting to force Collins to hold up that Stifle mana for as long as possible and saying, you know, if you got it, I'm going to make you hold it up.
Likes what he sees. And, yeah, just, as you kind of mentioned, just trades land drops, stares. The pressure is on Collins. He's going to fetch, and Aiden holds him here. Does he want, thinking whether or not he wants to fetch himself.
Right, and this is a spot where he knows the other cards on top of his deck with Ponder, and if it turned out it was a situation where he only actually wanted one of the cards,
he's going to do it anyway.
This is an opportunity to guarantee that you're shuffling the other cards away.
He does think about it, but decides that at least the top card of his deck is still one he's interested in. which means we go over to Collins, finds a tropical island. Three of both tropical and volcanic, so just setting up the mana here as he follows it up with a ponder.
Tarmogoyf hanging out in his hand just kind of does the work for him on choosing which color he wants. And outside of the card Pyroblast, most of the red cards in the deck aren't particularly important until turn 100 as it stands.
Once you have them in Bolt range, then Bolt becomes one of the most important cards. But until then, it's not doing much.
Exactly. You just need your tropical islands to develop your threats that are worth multiple hits of damage. We call those creatures for short.
He does keep the top 3 from the ponder. See if he can get a threat down. Right now, it looks like the answer is no. Holds up a Wooded Foothills. Lightning Bolt, Spell Snare, both available for Collins. Force of Will as well.
That bolt could end up playing. Brier has a Monastery Mentor in his hand. Probably not wanting to develop it until he can actually do something the turn that it comes into play.
Brier actually has a lot of good 3-mana cards. He has the Mentor you mentioned. He also has a copy of Back to Basics if he gets to the point where he wants to start trying for sorcery speed things. But right now, I guess with Collins having no board, he seems pretty happy not doing any of that. And just letting this game go.
Exactly. Let's just both build up a ton of resources, and then I will lean on the fact, I being the Miracles player, speaking in the first person here, will lean on the fact that my cards are pretty powerful, and your cards are Khans of Tarkir commons.
Yeah, this Hooting Mandrills, a 4/4 Trampler.
An entire hoot of mandrills. A strange unit of measurement, but I don't question these things.
Could be a hoot of owls.
No, it's a hoot of mandrills.
Or of mandrills.
Listen, I don't know how they measure things on Tarkir. I've never been.
Well, it depends on whether it was before or after they rewrote history. It changed.
Oh, yeah, maybe when Sarkhan went back in the Nexus of Fate,
right.
All of a sudden hoots weren't something they used to measure.
Right, the dragons measure them differently.
Oh, no, people say, I don't give a hoot. So that's got to be a measurement of something. That's like, I don't give a pound, but instead it's a hoot. I don't really know what it's measuring, but, well, mandrills, but.
Right, no, that would make sense. It certainly still is a measurement. It's one of those, right, I think the thing it was measuring was lost, but the term stays.
Yeah, it's sort of like saying, I don't give a flock. You know, instead of, it's like a group still.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think.
Or like, I don't give like a school, like a fish.
We're no, just keep. I think it's all these things. Just keep going. No, this is great.
I don't give a pack. I don't give a posse.
Aiden Brier finally cast a spell while we were discussing the many different things we can measure. It was an accumulated knowledge.
We were discussing units of measurement, Matthias. Don't water down my studies.
Another copy actually in Aiden's hand. I believe the AK found another one.
That's basically ideal.
It's just value.
I mean, you're building a 4-mana divination. Sometimes you just really want your hieroglyphic illumination to do both halves for the same amount of mana.
Tarmogoyf from Collins does finally find a threat here, but he's given Aiden a lot of time to set up, and it may or may not be enough here. This is where it's going to get interesting.
Yeah, it's hard to tell if Brier was tanking there or saying, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, Brier's hand looks to be Monastery Mentor, Swords to Plowshares, Accumulated Knowledge, and 2 Brainstorms. So a lot to work with. Now he finally goes for some white mana, fetches up a Plains. Wouldn't mind seeing a Swords to Plowshares here.
Looks like there's one hiding out.
And that's front of the hand, so we're going to get a Swords to Plowshares on the Tarmogoyf. And if his plan, and I think it is going to be just end step then to also play a second accumulated knowledge, this is really going Aiden's way.
Yeah, absolutely. He just wants to play another accumulated knowledge here, and if Collins fights over any of this, Brier just locks up this back to basics.
Yeah. And Collins is going to remember, this is all in Collins' turn. He has a spell snare, and this draw 2 is probably going to earn the spell snare. But then, yeah, the back to basics you mentioned is going to be interesting.
Right, and you're kind of just priced into these types of plays where you don't necessarily feel great about spell snaring an accumulated knowledge instead of a Snapcaster Mage counterbalance, etc. But if that is going to be 2 cards and you're not applying pressure, you need to just try to whittle down both players' resources.
There is the spell snare. So, no draw 2, but Aiden quick on the untap. And so he has an option on follow-ups. He has back to basics. He also has Monastery Mentor. It's the one you like more here.
Here, I'm very into this back to basics. We see Mullen tapped out. You can just slam the door.
They're going to be the try here. And it looks like it's Mentor. Now, he may not... I actually think he may just have a pair of Brainstorms.
It looks maybe Brainstorm Force or 2 Brainstorms.
So, not an option on 3 drops, but this is still going to be a pretty good 3 drop. Here's Brainstorm to follow up.
We feel nice about these.
And not much. Collins, I'm surprised, didn't actually fight over this Monastery Mentor at all. He had a Force of Will.
No, he has a Lightning Bolt in his hand.
Okay.
So he knows he can mop it up with something else, and this Force of Will is so valuable in the matchup.
Yeah, see, among the 3 cards drawn for Aiden, one of them Jace the Mind Sculptor, and there is a copy of Back to Basics.
Back to basics, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Brainstorm Ponder. This is kind of an embarrassment of riches.
Plenty of things that have to be Force of Willed in this hand.
Aiden looking at this hand, trying to figure out how he loses this game.
Exactly. Just closing doors.
All right, I've won the game. How do I not give it back to my opponent?
Looks like he's going to hang on to the Back to Basics and a Brainstorm. And we'll pass. Doubt with a deck that, top of the deck that good, I doubt he's going to crack this fetch land to Brainstorm.
No, if they were bad cards, we would have seen him sorcery speed the Ponder or something to that effect to just get another monk when Collins couldn't just respond to the fetch with a Lightning Bolt.
Right.
But here, Brier just knows his cards are that good.
Now he will lose the Monastery Mentor to that Lightning Bolt, but that's going to be fine. And that's where things are going to start out. From Collins, it's Lightning Bolt on the Mentor. And Aiden's going to accept that. Follow up. Here's our Khanza Tarkir, Hooting Mandrills.
Got a whole hoot of them.
Just a hoot of Mandrills. All 4 of them. I'm going to say 4. That's why they're 4-4. Some good news for Collins' teammate. This game's not good for him, but Robert Stanley picks up a win in Standard, so they're going to go to the 3rd game.
Coming right down to the wire.
And back over to Brier. And there's the Back to Basics. So it's one of the follow-up plays. 2 mana up, Aiden can pay for a Spell Pierce here. It's going to take a lot for Collins to fight over this.
Yeah, and we do know he has that Force of Will hanging out, and this is going to force his hand. All puns aside.
Yeah, so he plays the Force Will. I don't think Aiden can counter back, but then it sets up the game for Jace to be cast the next turn.
Exactly, and Jace is so good against elf creatures. A lot of times that minus just feels like the creature is going away forever.
You can see a pass there from Brier. Yeah, Force of Will, pitching Stifle, the play here for Collins. Going to keep that off the board, but Collins now running out of resources, just down with that 1 card left in hand.
Brainstorm's a pretty good last card.
Can fix things. A Ponder from Aiden. We know Jace is on the top. It looks like Jace, Monastery Mentor, and a Plains. Yeah, just more power cards here. Yeah, those will be kept. And you know, you're going to thought when the card he put in his hand that turn was the Plains.
Could have seen Brier get greedy there and attack with the Monk token as a 3/3. And then if Mullen blocked, you can fetch and Brainstorm to force the trade.
Swinging Aiden down to 15. The draw here for Aiden is Jace the Mind Sculptor. Just 2 cards in Collins' hand. It's a Brainstorm and a Flusterstorm. That is not going to do it against Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Flusterstorm is not quite Spell Pierce here.
No, this is one of the situations that's instant or sorcery, which Jace is neither of. Question is whether Collins will try to Brainstorm in response. If he finds a Force of Will, he can dump all his cards to counter this.
You're more or less priced into digging for it here because this is just going to unsummon the Hooting Mandrills and put you so far behind.
So that's the play. Collins starts on Brainstorm. Aiden says accepts. Collins draws Volcanic Island. Red Elemental Blast.
Wow.
And Spell Pierce?
Yes, Spell
All right,
Pierce.
so he has the Red Blast. Still alive right now. He's actually done a good job. So he's made it through a Back to Basics. He's made it through a Jace. Now he's going to have to answer the next one, which is a Monastery Mentor.
Well, there's a point where if Brier has been whittled down to just a couple of cards, this Mentor is not actually doing very much.
Right. Not to mention the Hooting Mandrills is doing a lot of damage here.
Exactly. Last turn we saw Brier at almost 20 life, and we thought, maybe this 4 points is fine. But a couple turns of taking 4, things change pretty drastically.
All right, Red Elemental Blast takes care of the Jace. Monk a token and can attack. Prowess means it's an attack for 2. Collins is down to 17. But the top card we know is Monastery Mentor on Aiden's side. He's going to take some damage, though, for this turn, and likely some more damage on the next turn.
Right, without something else that he can cast, this Monastery Mentor, he's not just throwing it under the bus.
Right. Now, Collins, because of that Brainstorm, his top of the deck's not particularly good. He's deciding if he wants to draw 1 or just immediately fetch. Looks like there's a card in there he wanted.
Decided that Flusterstorm's worth it. Makes sense. It's one of your ways to fight over a hard cast Terminus here.
Aiden down to 11, and now we see Monastery Mentor. That's the play from Aiden. That one you're not really going to counter out of Collins' deck.
No, not really.
And last card in Aiden's hand is Brainstorm. Makes a Monk token. Maybe he'll just race back against the Hooting Mandrills. Flusterstorm. That will work. That'll be a counter.
You
Storm
have
is
to.
3. Yeah, you can't let him just chain into another cantrip here.
And now we're actually at a spot where if Brier just finds another cantrip or so, he can just race
It can be
Hooting
lethal.
Mandrills.
Yeah. Attack for 2, Collins to 15. He's got to be worried about losing this race. I don't know if he can really play any differently.
He's definitely in a pretty bad spot here.
Yeah, Aiden's empty-handed, so the Hooting Mandrills are good for at least 1 more attack.
Exactly, and there's even it's possible that Brier just bricks from here.
Right. If he just draws running lands.
Exactly, draws a couple lands in a row, Mullen's able to get some hits in, and then all of a sudden Brier is to try and triple block, and Collins could draw, say, a lightning bolt, and it's anyone's game.
Yeah, he needs a couple more draw steps to survive. So this is in his upkeep. He knew that last card on top from Brainstorms earlier, decided he didn't want it, so cracks a fetch land before drawing for turn. And looks like he drew something pretty decent. Ponder.
That's like
It might
3
be
new
something
draw
decent.
steps. You know how bad he wanted one of those.
A Delver of Secrets, a fetch land. It's got a third one in there. It might be a Vendilion Click. If it is, that'd be huge.
Vendilion Click is nice. That card just completely swings the race because
Yeah.
it shaves a turn off of it and is evasive.
See Will Pulliam right now. They have 2 heads on the standard Game 3. It's Robert Stanley and Matt Tumavitch.
Collins trying to figure out just how to play this in order to win the game.
Yeah, he is up 1-0 here. So
if he can steal this, that's the match,
Yeah.
and it locks the team for day 2.
Well, right now, this is a pretty big decision point, right? Because once he keeps these top 3 cards, these are more or less the cards he's working with for the remainder of the game. So he has to figure out whether these are good enough to beat the board.
Exactly, and there's also even a point where he could theoretically say, click himself to bottom this Spell Pierce, draw the Delver.
Swings for 4, Aiden down to 7.
And just use that to get a card deeper.
And passes back. So over to Aiden Go. This is a big draw here. A cantrip, and things could get dicey. And Vendilion Click during the draw step. And it was a cantrip. It was preordained, though, so it's a sorcery. Aiden doesn't get the chance to cast it. Vendilion Click coming through huge here. It's a redraw from Aiden. Is the next one also a cantrip?
And this was an interesting decision on Mullen's part, because if Brier decided, all right, I can take one more hit from this Hooting Mandrills and just sent the squad in, then all of a sudden Mullen could have instepped the Vendilion Click.
And then
but
tried to have the lethal.
If he let Brier cast a spell, then Brier just gets another blocker.
Yeah, you're right. If he insteps the Vendilion Click, there'd be a 1/1 left over, and it wouldn't be lethal. Here is a swing, though, from Collins, and is Aiden going to have to trade away the team with Hooting Mandrills? It doesn't feel good. The other option is to chump the Hooting Mandrills. Kind of. It's kind of a chump block.
Can't feel good.
No, I mean, it's like, right, it's either one monk token or it's everything.
Exactly. Like, those are your options, and here you can't really beat a lightning bolt anyway. So I would be inclined to just triple block and hope to find a way to answer the Vendilion Click on the battlefield.
Certainly is a way to play it. It doesn't feel good. I mean, he had the draw in the preordain, and it was just countered by the Vendilion Click. Now Aiden is hoping the top of his deck can bring some help. I do think I like the triple block line as well. It gives Aiden 2 turns to work with, but it feels really bad to lose the mentor in this situation.
Exactly, and this is a spot where you would have to chain several cantrips back to back in order to make this Monastery Mentor worth it against a Hooting Mandrill that's still alive, as well as the Vendilion Click. Exactly, you're still dead on the battlefield, and if you chain that many cantrips, you can probably just find an answer to the Vendilion Click in this.
Aiden, yeah, this is a game that was going so well, but Collins has just been persistent in staying in it. And now here's the block. Aiden's going to take the single chump block and go to 1. Trying to think maybe he can race back. Down to 1 he goes. 2 cards in Collins' hand. One of them is Delver of Secrets. The other one looks to be Spell Pierce. So not too much help there.
All of the decisions are just agonizing from Mullen's side of the battlefield, because one wrong card, depending on what Brier does, one misstep, and the game is over.
I think he's deciding now whether he wants to make Delver, how much he wants to respect Terminus. And here comes Aiden's draw. Is it going to get him out of it? It was not a Terminus, did not miracle it. And he might still be in it. Does he? It was at least 1 land in the 2. If it's 2, there's no play here.
It looks like what he drew last turn was likely the Flooded Strand.
Remember, even if it's a Brainstorm, he can't reset a Brainstorm anymore. Just at 1 life. Swords to Plowshares was the pickup.
Swords to Plowshares plays.
Swords the Vendilion Click. Now this one's actually pretty interesting. He could have tried to trap the Hooting Mandrills here. If in an attack he double blocked, prowessed both his guys. Swords the Vendilion Click. It allows Collins to draw another card.
Right, and this is a spot where it's tough because, you know, Collins knows all the cards on his deck because of that Ponder.
Right.
So there's certainly a spot where if you know your opponent keeps on a Ponder, you probably want to do this before they get a chance to draw the last card off of the Ponder.
Hooting Mandrills attacks in. Now remember, 1 prowess trigger has happened. So this is a 3/3 and a 2/2. And so Aiden's going to double block. And on Collins' side, Yeah, I'm a bit surprised he didn't wait here, but looks like he's going to make that trade and now just make Delver of Secrets and hope that this transforms.
Yep, exactly. That's all you can do in this spot.
Top card. It is a Miracle card. I see Aiden holding on before putting it into his hand. Will he Miracle Terminus here?
Easiest terminus of my life.
Yeah, just can't risk it. So he does keep the board clear at 1. Can Collins find a bolt? Can he find a threat? Not yet.
Ooh.
Now both players they are racing to see who can get out of this first. Daze and Spell Pierce in Collins' hand. No help. Aiden's hand draws. No help.
Go.
Back to Collins.
Go.
It is Winter Orb. Not really. Not really. Passes. Now doesn't even want to play it.
No, that's the spot where you hold it to try and get them.
Counterbalance for Aiden. That plays some here. Does he Spell Pierce it, Daze it, and then make a Winter Orb?
Oh,
it's a funny line.
Oh.
Right? It's like, tap your lands, tap your lands.
That's a nice line.
Decides it's not worth it. Draws, it's a fetch land. Still no help for Collins. Oh, now he makes the Winter Orb.
Time for some information.
Back to basics. Well, I'll see your Winter Orb and I'll raise you one.
Two can play that game. This could actually end up blowing Aiden out.
If he makes back to basics?
Yeah. Because then he just could get dazed to just tap another land and then Spell Pierce.
I don't think that back to basics is worth tapping 3 lands over at this moment.
Right. Aiden, it looks like he has a Supreme Verdict in his hand.
Right. Okay, if he has that, yeah, I don't, it takes him 3 turns to get that mana back.
Exactly. That's just too long. You might just die.
And he decides the same thing. Back to Collins we go. Draws another Spell Pierce.
These cards have become hard counters again.
Snapcaster Mage for Aiden. It's a way to gain life. He can Snapcaster a Swords to Plowshares if things get really bad.
That gives him a fetch.
One fetch.
I mean,
yeah.
I think that's incredibly valuable here just because it looks like he has a Terminus hiding out as well, and that's his 6th mana source.
All right, Brainstorm picked up for Collins. That's live, but there is a counterbalance on the board. So, Brainstorm, counterbalance. Will Aiden make sure this gets countered? It looks like the answer is yes. With counterbalance trigger on the stack, Snapcaster Mage is the play. Collins, though, has at least 1 Spell Pierce, maybe 2. He might be able to fight over this Brainstorm.
Trying to just make Brier commit as much mana as possible to this.
Exactly. Snapcaster into play. I assume he's targeting Brainstorm. That is down. He does. And now the fighting begins. Collins starts with a Spell Pierce on the flashbacked Brainstorm. And now I like this where Aiden, this is the cute part, right? Okay, top card is a fetch land. If it was a 1, then he could just like let this whole counter war just not, happen. And then, yeah. So he'll pay for the Spell Pierce, but Collins has another one. And he can't pay for that one, so that'll counter. Now the Brainstorm, all the way back on Collins' side, will resolve. Tarmogoyf, Force of Will, Volcanic Island.
Collins may have squeaked this out. Force of Will of Tarmogoyf with this Daze in his hand.
Right, and Aiden has no mana.
Locked down.
That Winter Orb. Now there's a Snapcaster it can block for a turn.
That is true.
Is it?
We know a fetch land is on top of Brier's library. That's not going to do anything.
No, he'll get 1 turn because of that chump block. But there's a Force of Will Daze in Collins' hand.
Exactly. It has to be exactly, let's see, anything. It could be anything. And I believe...
I don't think he can do it because he can't force back. He can't pay. He has a Supreme Verdict in his hand, but he's not going to get to enough mana in time.
If the top card of his deck is after the Windswept Heath, if the top card is Force of Will.
Oh, to counter the Force of Will.
Right. So if you say rip a Terminus or a Swords to Plowshares, and then the next card is Force of Will with counterbalance, that keeps him in the game.
And for Aiden, paying for that first Spell Pierce may have been the mistake here.
Right. But it's a spot where you're kind of priced in at that point, where if you go that far down the rabbit hole.
Right. True Name Nemesis picked up for Collins to swing in. Here's a chump block.
Fastest chump block all day.
Says go. Back to Brier. Draws. It's not a Terminus.
Didn't look like a white card.
No, if it's not a Terminus or Swords available, he doesn't have... I guess he can make a Snapcaster Mage to block again. And that's going to be the play. Here's Snapcaster Mage just as a 2-1. Collins can pull the trigger on Daze.
Oh my
Or Force. It doesn't even matter. Force Will pitching True Name Nemesis. That's going to counter it. That's his blocker. Top card. It's not a 5.
Oh.
It's a 0. Snapcaster's countered. Says go. Untaps. Collins Mullen. What was this? This is going to be a 2-0 win. He swings it in and swings his way to day 2. What a show. 2-0. He is your winner.
What an incredible game.
Wow. And that will do it. Yeah, pulls out what looked to be an unwinnable game.
I am